Good morning, America. Thank you for watching Taxes Made Easy. Got an interesting show today. Yesterday, I kind of ranted and raved about the IRS, which there's plenty to rant and rave about. But I want to focus today on how do you still get things done with the IRS when they're more inefficient than ever. It can be so frustrating dealing with them. I myself had to do 3 calls on one case, and again, there's a lot of ineptitude in that. And it's not just the representatives, but it's rules, stupid rules and bureaucracy being added to it. So again, we're going to talk about how to get through and work with the IRS despite all of these challenges. There are ways to do it, and there's actually some ways the IRS is improving. Not a lot, but there's some. So stay tuned. And we have a lot of news. I want to talk about the Mexican election that just happened that pretty much nobody knows about. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for watching Taxes Made Easy here on this moneyculture.tv. We have a lot of interesting news today. I'm going to try to get through it. And it's going to be a little bit different, some of the things that we're talking about. So the first article we're going to talk about is dealing with native tribes. So the Supreme Court just had an interesting case that came down. This article is from the Epic Times. It was a 5-4 decision, so it was a close decision. So you had all 3 liberal justices joined by Justice Gorsuch and Justice Roberts. Now, if you know anything about Justice Gorsuch, he is an ardent defender of Native American rights. And the interesting story here, and this helps you understand part of why people make decisions. A lot of fights over laws are done because Congress, there's been a lot of time, things have changed, and Congress just hasn't clarified this. So this has gone through the courts, through the multiple appellate courts, and they've gone different directions. And this is usually when you have a disagreement between appellate courts. This is when the Supreme Court will step in and pretty much lay down the law. So in this case, there's a law from the 1970s. I guess it doesn't really matter when. Talking about how the U.S. government is supposed to reimburse Native tribes for certain costs. Now, a lot of that has changed with the ACA or Obamacare that was passed. And so how much is the government responsible for paying for the cost to run their healthcare problems on native land, and how much should be paid? So this is really, they're taking a 1970s law, which is the only law on point, and trying to apply current issues and costs due to the ACA law passed in 2014, I believe, and determine how much Native tribes should be reimbursed by the federal government. So, because Congress hasn't spoken since the 1970s, they haven't passed a law on it. There's this confusion. And so everybody's trying to figure out what was Congress's intent back in the 1970s. And here's the problem. This is why it can get so murky is, who knows? They weren't thinking about ACA. They weren't thinking about changes, 30 years into 40 years into the future. But they have to go by the language of the statute, try to determine what was their point, what were they trying to do when they passed this. Now, some of it is going to the original intent. Some of it is, hey, let's make some good policy currently, regardless of what their intent was. Now, the truth of the matter, are there valid disagreements on this? Absolutely. This is why you get a split opinion of 5-4. But the easy thing would be for Congress to do its job and just pass a law to clarify it. It probably needs updating if it was done in the 1970s. Whichever way, the biggest thing is this, from the conservative side, is this going to be a huge additional burden? Wasn't anticipated when they wrote the law in the 1970s. Of course it wasn't. And that someone needs to speak and clarify. It's a Congress. So It sounds a little funny, but that's kind of how things run with the law half the time. Is they're trying to figure out, interpret laws, um, and when you have the same law being interpreted differently across the country, which can happen, but those are the cases that usually get picked up by the Supreme Court, so that we have one standard across the country. But believe it or not, there are different standards and laws depending on what appellate court you live in. And I've had clients run into that very issue in dealing with the IRS. So this is a next article. It's kind of funny, sad but funny. So this just happened. This article's from yesterday. They had this perfume store, I believe, and the article kind of goes off a little bit about lack of decency, teen takeovers, etc. And it's become a huge problem where you have groups of teenagers acting as gangs. A lot of it is organized gangs, and just robbing stores blind. They run in as a group, snatch what they can, and run out. And where are the parents? Oh my goodness! I mean, these they're learning the criminal life, and most of the time getting away with it because it's so difficult to track down these people. So this interesting story. It's a perfumania store. Never heard of it. Must be an Eastern thing, but I'm usually not in perfume stores. Not my thing. So 4 people ran in, tried stealing hundreds of dollars of merchandise at the store. So they grabbed everything and then they tried to run out. And the shoplifters, one of them there were kids in the store. They said, "Oh no, you don't," and they held the store. The doors closed, the front doors. They wouldn't let them out the front doors, and the shoplifters were, pleading, "Let us go," and they refused. And this isn't the first time they had been. They visited twice in the last week, so this is the 3rd time they're stealing from the store. So because they held the front door to block them from exiting, they actually dropped their merchandise and exited through a back door, and left empty-handed. But again, here their son was with them, and it took the officers 30 minutes to respond because they have other things they're doing. It's tough to respond timely to these kind of things. But again, it's sad that that's kind of what we're dealing with today in society. Kudos to the good Samaritans that stepped up, but luckily the shoplifters weren't armed. And again, it's very dangerous that these things are continuing. So we've talked a lot about EVs. This is a quick little article here. So this is a Democrat senator labeling the progress on government EV chargers pathetic. Now, should the government be picking when this just happens when you get too much big government in a situation, and so they're starting to launch investigations because only 7 charging stations have been built using billions of dollars since 2021. This is ridiculous. This is where too often the government comes in. Solyndra is a perfect example. There's fraud, waste, abuse, corruption through the roof with government spending. This is why, again, normally when the government takes money out of the economy through taxes and then spends it on their priorities, it's not spent efficiently. It's not, there's no give and take. There's no invisible hand of the market working here because the government's just taking from the people, and then a lot of it goes to corruption, it goes to waste, or it's just not used efficiently. Now, there's a lot of inefficiencies when it comes to military spending. Don't get me wrong, but that's something we don't want to privatize. So there are definitely things the government needs to be doing: roads, defense, border. But when they get into other things like this, it is usually wasted money, wildly inefficient, and again, usually rife with corruption. So this is Democrat Senator Jeff Merkley referred to the progress as pathetic, and he's right. If we want to invest in EVs, if we're going to use tax dollars for it, let's at least build the charging stations. But they've only built 7 and 3 years in, and Merkley's saying something is terribly wrong. It needs to be fixed. And this is something that was interesting. And this is the government getting in their own way. Merkley also criticized existing federal highway rules that prevent the installation of EV charging stations at rest stops. You have rest stops for people to stop, to maybe eat something, to hang out. I mean, if you're not familiar with rest stops, they're all over the West. It's a perfect place for someone to just plug in, take a break, take a breather, stretch their legs, and then move on. Why doesn't Congress fix this? It sounds like an easy fix. And why don't we do this? I mean, he's in the Senate. I don't know who would oppose something like that, or why you wouldn't do that. I mean, the main concern, yeah, and this is one thing the article hits on. Again, you have multiple states dealing with multiple programs. Again, you have multiple layers of bureaucracy. Just makes everything go slower and less efficient. But one of the things that mentioned here, there are a lot more charging stations being built. Most of them private. I'm trying to look. One of the biggest issues is that some of the areas slated for charging stations don't even have electricity yet. So you're trying to get electricity out to remote areas and sufficient electricity to charge these charging stations, because it's not your average. We're going to turn on a light bulb at a rest stop. But I think there's some common sense things that they could do, and I wish they would. So our taxpayer dollars aren't just flushed down the toilet like this. We're coming up on a break, and I do want to get through one last article. We've already talked about Red Lobster going and filing for bankruptcy. Now, is it all Bidenomics? This comes from the Daily Fetch. It is a right-leaning source. It's not all Bidenomics. Red Lobster has made some pretty bad missteps on its own. But again, with the increased costs, you have locations closing across the country, some of them that are profitable, some that have been there for 30 years, that are going to affect the local economy, and people are not happy about it. But so they closed down 93 of its 700 locations, so about 1 in 7. And now another 135 is really going to take a huge hit on Red Lobster. But again, we have more businesses closing and suffering. So we'll be right back after this next break, and just stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. Just want to move on from the Red Lobster one. And this is an interesting article from the Wall Street Journal. So this is why property taxes are going up and how to cope. I'm not going to get into this too much, but I did think this was important to note. A lot of good information talking about property taxes. So why are they increasing? Mainly because property rates are property values, home values are going up with inflation. A lot of people will celebrate that, but one of the big costs associated with that is property taxes going up. And depending where you're living, it can be a huge shock. So my sister, I mentioned this before, bought a home in Austin, Texas. They didn't realize how quickly, Austin is known for the property values and taxes going through the roof. They ended up paying $1,000 more than expected, and property taxes, and it was, I don't know how true this was, but she said monthly. Probably not monthly, but it increased their monthly mortgage payment and for property taxes and homeowner insurance to the point where they couldn't afford the home. It was a nice home, roughly a $500,000 home, and then all of a sudden the payments went through the roof, and they had to move. They moved further east to a cheaper area and bought a home, straight up. So again, it's to avoid these issues, but where they're going to have a lot lower property taxes. So the two biggest things affecting property taxes, you can have a higher property tax rate, but still pay more. So it's based on your rate and the value of your home. So Texas has a 1.9% property tax, also because they don't have any income tax. So they do have a higher property tax rate. But depending on your locality, some are higher like Austin, others are lower. But when you look at purchasing a home, you need to find out and discuss what the total payment will be and increase property taxes. So whenever you purchase a home, whenever a home transfers, that's when the value is usually reassessed and the property taxes go up. So some of the higher states, New Jersey is the highest at 2.46%. They're known for having very high property taxes. Illinois, Connecticut, New Hampshire, some of the lowest states, Hawaii, Alabama, Colorado, Nevada, and Utah. And Nevada is interesting. I always thought they had higher property taxes. I think they have higher utility costs as well, but they don't have income tax. So that's actually, a surprise. It talks about why they're going up, and I'm just going to kind of skip through that. Your residential assessment ratio. This is going into the weeds. I'm just going to highlight this so you know to come back. There are discounts and exemptions, and they're saying about a third of homeowners miss out on exemptions to lower their property taxes. That there can be exemptions for primary residences, etc. And then you can appeal your property tax assessment. So I would read through this article. I'm going to post it to our website, but this is just the Wall Street Journal, by side, why property taxes are going up. So interestingly enough, I have an employee who's a Mexican citizen, and I've been hearing about this, but I haven't quite seen this in the news. It hasn't been in the news at all, really, in the United States, but I started looking for it. So townhall.com is one of the sources I look at. And this is an interesting interview with Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan, as the head of the UFC, travels internationally, and he has fighters in Mexico, and so he deals with a lot of these issues. They just had their big presidential election. So it was a big thing in Mexico. Everybody went and voted, and we have our presidential election this year as well. But their presidents are in term for 6 years. So it's going to be, have quite an impact on the Mexican government and economy for the next 6 years. The problem here, 37 political assassinations this year. Some of them happening just after election. So people had just won office and got assassinated. And it's just, you had Mexico's first female president was one, had a landslide victory. There are people that say that she won at the behest of the cartels, which were at election booths, a lot of election manipulation, and just crazy. And so not only did you have 37 killed, but hundreds of people were threatened. 560 were given security guards by the government, but even then, you had 828 non-lethal attacks on political candidates in the current election campaign. So very crazy. And I pulled up a couple articles. There's a lot of articles since this just happened from Newsweek. So this is talking about how they're going to deal with the border, but also how the cartels impacted the election, and so this is the big elephant in the room. The cartels. They're some of the biggest employers in Mexico. They have the biggest organizations, and in many areas of Mexico, they stand down the military. And if you don't think this spills over across the border, you're nuts. The cartels control the border. They control who gets across the border. You don't walk across the Mexican border without paying the cartels to cross. It's a very well established fact. Just look it up. It's very easy to see that. We're not controlling the border, but the cartels are controlling the Mexican border, and they're making millions and millions daily off of illegal immigration, which is further enriching the cartels, and destabilizing Mexico as a result. So the cartels are making more money than ever, and it talks about the border issue with either Joe Biden or Donald Trump, and who the new president is, and whether or not they're going to actually address it. So the previous president, Obrador, was highly criticized for being way too soft. But again, it's very scary to take on the cartels. They kill lots of people. And moving on. Well, I want to talk about one last article here, and talking about different states. There's some states that are in Mexico that are worse, much worse off with the cartels. But again, this representative, Cynthia Juarez, ran for office after a good friend was gunned down, and she's hoping she doesn't get gunned down too. They had the top candidate for governor of their state was murdered as well, and it really is has accelerated. A lot of people are saying that while political violence is nothing new, the extent of the problem in this campaign has shocked even seasoned politicals. So the top candidate for governor was killed with his bodyguard right before the election. So, and then other people are just abandoning the race. And so, again, one of this seasoned politician here, Mr. Velasquez, says he's endured his threats his entire life. And the violence isn't just that focused on one party. It looks like it's essentially focused on whoever isn't going to do what the cartels want them to do. So the corruption throughout the parties, and it gets worse when they target and murder or beat up anybody that doesn't want to toe the line. There's one last thing I want to highlight here. And again, talks about more of the damage here. This paragraph right here. It said we have to move forward little by little until we achieve the pacification of the entire country. So this is a Mexican senator talking. But we have another problem, our big neighbor to the north. So if you don't think we affect the livelihoods of people to the south, Colombia, Peru, all through Central and Southern Mexico or America, but especially America, one of the biggest issues is the drug use. For the drugs to be bought and sold, there must first be supply and demand. And who's consuming the drugs? Americans. And that is the truth that expanding drug use, using more and more drugs just enables cartels, funds them, and funds violence all throughout Mexico. So it is, I know it's a popular thing now to legalize drugs. It's popular to try to, make even hardcore drugs legal. Oregon just had a reverse course on it because it is so damaging. So when we talk about cracking down on drug use, it's not only because it makes users desperate for drug money and they commit a lot of crime. I mean, there's all kinds of societal ills that come with increased drug use, illicit drug use. But one of the biggest things that isn't considered is how it damages and destroys livelihoods and really devastates entire economies. And Mexico is really suffers as a result of U.S. drug demand. So, again, if you haven't been talking or hearing about the Mexican election that just happened, it is right across the border. It affects us. It affects all kinds of people. So we should be good neighbors, but we're actually a pretty horrible neighbor to Mexico in many ways. And they return the favor because it's run and operated by cartels that we're largely funding here in the United States. And that's through drug use, through allowing them to control the border, human smuggling, you name it. The drug cartels are neck deep in it and making millions and billions of dollars off of United States money. So moving on, I want to focus on the topic of the day for the rest of the session today. So this is something the IRS posted yesterday, and I kind of went, whoop-de-doo, here's something, and I shouldn't say it like that, but something that is something the IRS has improved, and it's called DUT, or Document Upload Tool. I actually used this yesterday. It can be very handy. 1 million upload isn't, when you're dealing with the entire country, excuse me, it's what it is that when you're on the phone with the IRS, usually they say, okay, fax me documents. The problem is that if the documents are too big, or if you have too many documents, or if the IRS demands too many, then they say mail it in. And it's their way to get off the phone and get off the conversation. So whenever you mail documents in, mailing documents to the IRS is one of the worst things you can do. A lot of times, whenever I talk to people, it's like, oh, my CPA wrote them a letter. I say, well, that's wonderful. It probably went absolutely nowhere. If it's not on one of their forms, it's not following their policies and procedures, the IRS does not care. So it's so much better to fax information to them, or use the document upload tool, which is pretty handy. True story yesterday, I called the IRS, spoke to the first person, had to send them my power of attorney. I faxed it over, had to wait 5 to 10 minutes for them to get it and receive it. And then the call dropped. Then I called back again, used the document upload tool, took 2 to 3 minutes. They had it in hand. And then they told me they couldn't give me what I wanted. Now I was in collections. But the gal was very apologetic, and she said, they just changed the rule, so we can't give you the transcripts you're asking for, even though this is collections that understands, has a lot more authority. I guess they wanted to give the lower levels of service something to do, so they're the only ones that can give transcripts now. And again, this is just the administration. It's like Dilbert world. If you're familiar with the comic Dilbert, the pointy-haired boss just makes up rules and does whatever, and they have the evil catbird running the company, torturing employees by making up ridiculous rules. That's the IRS in a nutshell. And there's plenty of good people that work there, but a lot of these decisions that come down are just stupid. And then to actually address the questions, they said, oh, well, you need to be sent to accounts management. I said, fine, send me to accounts management. Couldn't get the transcript I wanted because a lower level department now is the only one that can send it directly to me. So I got sent over to accounts management, and power of attorney should have been on file. It was on file for some years, but for some reason, the IRS CAF unit didn't have it on file for the year in question, which went all the way back to 2009. So I got transferred to accounts management, and the gal said, oh, you're not on file. I can't help you. I said, well, I have the power of attorney. I can fax it to you. I can use the upload tool to get it right to you. She goes, no, if it's not on file, I can't help you. I'm like, well, what if, before I could say, well, let me conference the client in, let me do something, I asked for her manager because, again, she was being stupid. And then she didn't hang up on me because that shows, when they ain't just hanging up on people, that shows as a black mark on their record. She put me on hold and left me there for 5 to 10 minutes till I disconnected. Never came back, never responded. Again, absolutely pathetic service. If this was a company, they would go out of business. So I might be a little frustrated still about it. But how do people as average taxpayers deal with this? How do you get through and deal with the IRS? One of the ways is using the tools that they do have, the improvements that they have made. But I'm going to go through kind of like a step-by-step how to deal with the IRS when customer service is in the toilet. And overall, it's gotten worse. It's gotten so much worse. So funny thing, I was joking around with this gal, and she was pretty friendly in collections. The gal in collections, she knew what she was doing. She was so apologetic. I'm so sorry. Last week I could have sent you this transcript, but they just passed this new rule. I'm like, why? She's like, I'm sorry. I have no idea why. Doesn't make sense to me, but I'm just the worker here. I'm not the one making these decisions. It's some pointy-haired boss in management that doesn't know what he's doing, making up ridiculous rules. And then I joked around. I was like, well, it sounds like it's kind of like special compliance, which is a new layer of bureaucracy the IRS created. They're not more informed. They're not more educated. And now they're just sending cases to special compliance, who knows how or why. They're harder to get through to. And we're finding that they're less competent many times. And so you have to go through collections and then try to get a special compliance. They have their own phone number, but they're harder than ever to get through to. And it's just more inefficiency, more bureaucracy. So first of all, when you are dealing with the IRS, it is very important to know who you need to talk to so you can get things done. So understanding their layers of bureaucracy and who to talk to is going to make or break whether or not, you can call, spend 2 hours, finally get through to someone, and they get someone that's absolutely useless. Happens all the time. So we've got another break coming up, and I'm going to really dive into this and talk about the different, how to get through, when to get through, and the numbers to call to actually get through to, or how to request the right people to resolve your case. Welcome back, everybody. So, when should you call the IRS? A lot of people, pretty much everybody, because their lines are so backed up, everybody's trying to call first thing in the morning on Monday or Tuesday. That's the worst time to call. And even now, throughout the day, it's usually pretty hard to get through to them. And IRS only puts out the main lines to call, so it's much harder. I mean, you can't call collections directly. You can't call, if your case is with special compliance, you can't get through to them directly. You have to call the main line, talk to someone on the first layer or two of bureaucracy, and you have to understand that they don't know what they're doing. They really don't. And they don't understand most of the rules and regulations, and they will give you bad and correct advice all the time. So the best times to call between 5 and 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, and it's in your time zone. And the way they do this, they go off your phone. So if the area code for your phone number. So if you have a California phone number, it's you're going to be able to call later. But if you have an East Coast number, you can call earlier in the day. So it might be a little bit easier if you call first thing in the day. But the lines, no matter where you are, the lines are open till 7 p.m. And that greatly helps people. And when you're calling later, that's when they're most available. It just makes it harder if you have a specific unit or person that you have to call. But usually, if that's the case, you have a direct phone number. If you have a revenue officer sign or something like that. So call later in the day. Who to speak to. So just understand when you first call in, you can get some information from the first layers of bureaucracy. You can get transcripts sent directly to you or mailed to you. But the best way to get a lot of information is through IRS.gov. It's not through calling the IRS. Not everybody wants to get on there, I understand, and set up a profile, do the face scan. You know, it's very Big Brother-ish, 1984. If you're okay with setting that up, that's the easiest way to get good information and get it quickly, where you don't have to deal with the lines. And the IRS is putting a lot of effort into that. Now, they also do have a chat function. So if you ever worked, had a phone company or internet company where they have a chat function, they do have a chat function on irs.gov as well, where you can try to get some basic questions answered. A lot of it is AI, but I believe there is a way to actually communicate with the real person. But again, take that advice with a grain of salt. Ask around, get informed, look up, get some information, because you need to know what your rights are, because if you just rely on what the IRS tells you, half the time they're wrong. Now, if you're trying to resolve a case, if you owe tax debt, you don't want to be speaking to the practitioner line unless all you're doing is setting up a simple installment agreement. And at times, I've been told at times they can't even do that anymore. If you're talking to the initial line, you need to know what you can do with them if you're looking for an installment agreement or a hardship status, or you're just trying to get information on the case. If the person doesn't sound like they know what they're doing, ask to get transferred to collections. I think this is an issue that's better dealt with in collections. If you've gotten any kind of collection notice or anything like that, you can always go to collections. Now, it's going to take you longer to get, you have to deal with another wait time. It's usually not nearly as long, though, when you usually put a head at the front of the queue when you're transferred from one department to another. But depending on how bad the wait times are, it can be another wait time. So if you're calling later in the day, really you can start calling around 3:30, 4. So when it starts the traffic starts lessening, but really between 5 to 7 is prime time to call. And collections is still open at that time. So when you get transferred to collections, that's when you're talking to someone that understands your rights. They understand. They're not going to give you nearly as much bad information. It happens, but usually not as bad. And so when you're talking to them, that's when you can set up an installment agreement where you're not paying the full amount. You can, pardon me, set up a hardship status where you don't have to pay anything. You can get hold times placed on the case. But be aware, when you're talking to collections, they're also putting dates and deadlines on your case. So if you need to file tax returns, don't play around with the IRS. That should go without saying. But you should take it seriously when they say, hey, you need to file this in this return. And so if you're using irs.gov, you should be able to pull those transcripts very quickly. If they have the information, they can send you those transcripts. So that gives you the basic information to go and file, especially for older years. Once you get that information, take it to a tax preparer, or if you feel confident doing it, just make sure it's done right. Let's get those tax returns in and submit it. Now, if it's within the last 3 years, you can still do it electronically, so they can be done quickly. Older returns are going to take 6 months. So if you have to, when I've talked ad nauseum about being current with estimated tax payments, you have to make sure before they can set up an installment agreement, before they can do a non-collectible status, you have to make sure all your tax returns are filed and that you're not going to owe moving forward. And the IRS will always ask for a payment first and foremost, but if you tell them, hey, I'm going to pay the current year taxes first, they should leave you alone because they all know that's what needs to be done. So knowing your rights, knowing what information you need to get from the IRS. So I go in there, I know exactly what I want. And ironically, when I call in and they know that I know exactly what I want, their demeanor can change dramatically, which is sad. It's not fair to average taxpayers. They will be very much more aggressive and threatening to average taxpayers. But when they know that someone's on the line that knows what their rights are, like a tax attorney or other tax professional, they sing a very different tune. Now, it's not everybody. There are sweet, kind people there. But this is how the new employees are being trained, to be very aggressive and demand payment now. You have to pay us now or we're going to threaten you. And sometimes I see people saying, well, this guy has to pay now. I was like, oh, really? What are you going to do? But it's understanding, and I try not to annoy the IRS. It doesn't help. It helps to be polite. I get that people get frustrated, but I've had people hire me just because they couldn't deal with the IRS. They were so frustrated and tired. And there's times I get frustrated with the person on the line because they're just incompetent and they won't get me a manager. It used to be that they would get you a manager. You could get a team lead when someone was wrong, didn't know what they were doing. You could get a second voice on the line to correct them and address the issue, and you're helping to educate the IRS. They're pathetic at that anymore. I almost never get manager callbacks. And most of the time when I ask for a team lead or a manager, I get disconnected on. So again, everybody has a supervisor and it should function at the IRS. Historically, it did function at the IRS. But again, it's another one of the dysfunctions and the massive decrease in customer service that's happening. So how do you know who to call? How do you know what your rights are? Get informed, look it up, do some free consultations, talk to people, and if your case is too complicated, hire a professional. But I don't mind educating people through the process, because if you're comfortable talking, and there's plenty of people I talk to, like, oh, I'm just setting up an installment agreement. Can I do that on my own? I'm like, yes, these are some of the things to watch for, but if someone feels confident doing that, I'll even give them helpful advice on how to save more money when they call the IRS themselves. And that's who you want to be talking about, someone that's not looking to nickel and dime you and make sure they get paid. Might make me a bad business person though. But know your rights and know the best way to communicate to the IRS. Like I mentioned earlier, and I talked to plenty of CPAs, they send in a letter, and sometimes you send in a letter and it goes to the right person and it actually gets addressed. I would say probably 60 to 75% it goes into a black hole. Whoever gets it, they look at it, it doesn't neatly fit a box. It's not a form, they don't know exactly what to do with it, and it just gets trashed. Or goes in a huge pile. I don't know what they do with it, but they lose stuff all the time. They lose tax returns all the time. And if you just send a letter, if they don't know what to do with it, forget about it. I do my best not to mail anything into the IRS unless I have a revenue officer, someone, or an offer examiner, someone where I know it's that particular person. I know they're going to get it, that person. But even then, when I'm mailing stuff to the offer unit on offers and compromise, they lose stuff all the time too. So again, faxing is ideal. This new document upload tool can be very handy, and I would ask, Kate, can I just do this? If you have it in a digital format and you know, as a file, and you can just upload it, they can see it almost instantaneously. So there are some tools the IRS is implementing. But number one key here, and I'm going to kind of wrap up with this, when you're dealing with the IRS and states too, you can't trust them as far as you can throw them. So you have to confirm, verify everything you do. You send them paperwork or you send in a tax return. You have to call, make sure that they get it. And again, you don't have to bug them every day because they're not going to have a different answer every day. But when you submit a tax return, follow up in 6 weeks. Schedule it out. Make sure it pops up on your calendar so you remember to call. And then you want to follow up every month or so. Did you get it? Is it processed? What's going on? Once they get it and it's in the queue for processing, you might follow up a couple months after that. But again, it's going to take them about 6 months. Some states can take 6 to 9 months to process older returns, and you just have to follow up and make sure it's done. Believe it or not, some of the work that we do are older returns where the IRS they haven't gotten it right. Where people look at it and say, oh, well, this was supposed to be done, hasn't been done. And so they send a referral up or you know, sometimes they don't even know what to do with the IRS. But you have to follow up and you have to continue to push and raise these issues until the IRS actually addresses them. That's why contacting managers that have more experience and can actually get it to the right person can be helpful. Using taxpayer advocate can be helpful, but they're overwhelmed. Don't expect a response within 6 months when you go to the taxpayer advocate. But if you file a 911 report, then you have to call them at least monthly and say, hey, I'm here. Nobody's assigned. And the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Or gets the oil. You have to be that squeaky wheel with the IRS. You have to be following up. You have to be making sure they're doing their job. Again, it's a pain to get through them, so you shouldn't have to call every single day. But if there's a deadline coming, make sure they get it, that you have proof they received it. And with that issue I mentioned earlier, where there was a difference in how the IRS treated cases depending on which appellate court they were with, it was all about certified mail. When you mail returns and send them certified, send them in separate packages. I mean, you can send them in all in one manila envelope, but you have to have them in separate manila envelopes inside. And whenever you send documents to the IRS, expect them to take 6 months just to look at them. They're atrocious. They've always been bad at mail documents, but they've only gotten worse. So I really would love to see the IRS customer service improve. I've seen the opposite. You can still get work done with them, and we still get cases resolved with the IRS on a regular basis. It's just so much harder. So if you feel like you're running into a brick wall and you're frustrated, give us a call. Get a free consultation. 520-485-7371, or you can find us at guardiantaxlaw.com, and that's where all these videos are being uploaded, is to our YouTube channel. You can go straight to YouTube and look us up at guardiantaxlaw.com or Guardian Tax Law. Get informed, and again, it's understanding how to work within the bureaucracy, and it's a changing bureaucracy. So again, there's plenty of times like yesterday. The gal told me, oh, we can't send you a transcript anymore. It's like, you guys are much more qualified to do it. And she goes, I know. I don't make those decisions. It's above my pay grade. So we had a good laugh. She released a little bit of stress. But, these poor IRS agents that do know what they're talking about, that do know how things should be handled, have to sit there and tell people day in and day out, I'm sorry, our administration made another dumb rule. Well, they can't say dumb rule. Another rule that prevents me from doing that, even though I'm very capable of doing it. So if you again, Dilbert just is a funny comic, but again, the frustrations of working in a government bureaucracy, and especially when the government bureaucracy is focused more on collecting than serving. That's where the IRS is now. They're absolutely not interested in providing top customer service because it's continued to go downhill. But you can still get done. You can still get your case resolved, and again, get good information, be informed, and take care of this stress. So you and your family, that's the whole goal, so that you don't have to worry about it. You can take this burden off your shoulders and breathe easy. So find that peace of mind. And then again, want to thank you for watching live or on broadcast here. And we will see. I hope everybody has a great weekend. It's a shorter weekend, but we've got some big holidays coming up. And, take care and enjoy your family.